Roger Stone, where would you say we are politically in the history of man in 2017? Go ahead and take over.
Well, Alex, I'm going to take your advice next week because I think we could improve my segments with more political discussion, perhaps fewer guests, although I'm very pleased to have my guests with me today. Alex, I think we're on the cusp of the greatest single political scandal in American history. This makes Watergate pale in comparison. The compounded lies that are now devastating the establishment are interrelated. On the one hand, they clearly had the Republican candidate for president under surveillance, and at the exact same time, their rationale for doing so has been completely exposed as fraudulent and political. This could do to the Democratic Party what Watergate did to the Republican Party. It could have a devastating effect on the midterm elections, but I think very much like Watergate, Alex, it's going to take some time to get to the bottom of this. Remember, the Watergate break-in was in June. That November, Nixon carried 49 states, stonewalling against critics. It wasn't until almost a year and a half later that the entire Watergate cover-up collapsed. And that's how it will be here, in my opinion.
All I know is a month ago, the New York Times was bragging that they'd been surveilling Trump Tower and had all this stuff on Flynn. And then now they said they never did it. But I'm turning it over to you. You got a full slate of big guests today. Roger Stone, go ahead.
Alex, the New York Times turns out to be an unwitting handmaiden of the intelligence services. If you go back to their story on January 20th, and you go to their story several weeks ago, in both cases, they were Central Intelligence sources say that they have emails, financial transaction records, and telephone intercepts. Of course, the New York Times hasn't seen any of those. They haven't been produced for the American people to look at. And the Times just takes what the CIA says at face value. Given their track record of lying about torture in the Iraq War, lying about Benghazi, lying about rendition, lying about Iran-Contra, lying about weapons of mass destruction and Saddam Hussein, I don't know why anyone would believe them. And now the chickens are coming home to roost. James, the Defense Intelligence Director for Obama, coming out and saying that there was no spying and there was also no Russian infiltration into the Trump campaign, is an attempt to diffuse this. But I don't think that is going to work. And frankly, I think the entire Obama crew, as I wrote today at Stone Cold Truth, needs to be dragged in front of a grand jury to find out exactly what did happen.
Show's yours, Roger. You got your guest waiting.
Yes, indeed. So I would like to focus first on the question of John Brennan, the CIA director, because this, in my opinion, he is the focal point of the disinformation campaign. You might have noticed last week in several different media publications, he came out and said, "I am not the leaker. I am not the leaker." Well, in Washington, as you know, Alex, when somebody announces that they are not the leaker, that means they are the leaker. The man doth protest too much. And therefore, joining us today from the American Spectator, we have George Neumayr, who has written a terrific piece, because we have talked a great deal at InfoWars about John Brennan's incredible background. And we have wondered how he got, into the position of being CIA director. Just for the record, according to his wiki biography, Mr. Brennan was an active supporter of the Communist Party candidate for President Gus Hall. And when I was on MSNBC only days ago, I was ridiculed for saying that Brennan in his younger days had been a communist. Thank you for joining us here. And we're delighted to have a fine representative of the American spectator.
Good to be with you. Thanks for having me.
So outline for us, if you would, this very important piece that you did that outlines, the role of Mr. Brennan, who I believe is the linchpin, the chief conspirator in this effort to smear Donald Trump and to make the case that there was something nefarious about his election, when in fact it was the globalists who were seeking to thwart the Constitution, smear Trump, and steal this election for Hillary Clinton.
Yeah, he is the genesis of the government's investigation into the Trump campaign. He received a half-baked piece of intelligence from an intelligence agency in one of the Baltic states, probably Estonia. And he used that to convince Comey and Loretta Lynch and the rest of the intelligence community to pursue a FISA court warrant that would allow the U.S. government to intercept communications from Trump Tower.
Now, it is my understanding that the government first went to the FISA court in June. They asked for permission to wiretap, to surveil Trump Tower. They also asked for surveillance of 3 U.S. citizens, yours truly, Paul J. Manafort, and of course, Carter Page, whoever he is, some guy who managed to join a Trump issue advisory group. It's unclear whether the FISA court disallowed the tapping of Trump, but may have approved the surveillance of the 3 of us in June, or whether they turned down the entire request and only approved it in October. If that is the case, I think the clearest way for the president to clear the air on this entire matter is to order the release of all of the documents that were filed with the FISA court.
Yeah, that's right. And you'll notice that John Brennan has not said a word since Trump sent that tweet out on Sunday. You know, he's the person with the most information here, and he's said nothing. They've sent out Clapper because he doesn't know the whole story. It's almost like a repeat of the Susan Rice situation in Benghazi, where the Obama people send out the person with the least amount of information to deny the story.
Well, what's interesting, of course, is that the sequence of events here, I'm convinced, is the president gives an extraordinarily effective State of the Union address. He has wind in his sails. The intelligence community immediately leaks the Sessions meetings with the Russian ambassador in an attempt to break Trump's momentum. And then Donald Trump, who may be the single best political strategist in the country today on the basis of instinct, lays this on the Russians over the weekend, or I should say lays it on the intelligence services, regaining the initiative and changing the entire narrative so that Obama and the Obama administration are on defense and Trump is back on offense. This is a classic example of the brilliance of Donald Trump and his unique understanding of the news cycle and particularly our highly charged cable television networks that, of course, cover this stuff ad nauseum. Trump is on the attack. Freedom is on the attack. The globalists are now in decline. The fact that they sought these warrants based on no evidence, no probable cause, it is really extraordinary. As you know, George, it is very rare for a U.S. citizen to be the target of the FISA court. Generally speaking, the FISA court is used to wiretap foreign nationals within the United States. That has generally been the case. So I'm very curious to know whether the warrants were for Manafort and myself and Page were approved in June or approved in October. George, where do you think this story goes? I know the president has called for a congressional inquiry. I'm not sure that that's the best avenue, in all honesty. I think there's a high probability that such an inquiry would get highly politicized. And you'd have mindless fools like Elijah Cummings, who continues to insist that there is evidence, that there is proof, when, of course, there is none. Where do you think this goes?
Well, I think, yeah, as you were saying, they're the people responsible for these leaks. You know, we've been hearing for 6 months now that the government has been investigating Trump campaign Russia ties.
Yeah, you know, George, I'm going to have to break you there. We'll come right back. We are going to go to a break here. And I want to remind people to hit the InfoWars store for the important products there that pay for this broadcast and this effort to bring the American people the truth. The truth. I'm Roger Stone, and thanks for joining us again at InfoWars. I want to return to George Neumayr of the American Spectator on the subject of CIA Director John Brennan. Where we left it off was trying to determine where this inquiry will go next, whether it will be a congressional investigation that ultimately brings the Obama crew down, or whether perhaps Jeff Sessions will impanel a grand jury and poll the various Obama administration officials, such as Loretta Lynch, Obama himself, of course, the director of Central Intelligence, John Brennan, Ash Carter, the defense secretary. So, George, where do you think this goes? I cut you off at the end of the last segment.
Yeah, I think either scenario that you sketched there is plausible, but I think the bottom line is, as you were saying, this is going to boomerang back on the criminal leakers. And I think the criminal leakers around John Brennan, and maybe even Brennan himself, are the most vulnerable here, because it's going to come out that they went to their stenographers in the press, like David Ignatius at Washington Post, and they gave them information that was a violation of the law. And I think Trump will ultimately be vindicated in terms of we'll find out that at the very least, a U.S. government investigation into Trump Tower was initiated. And that
it would be ironic, of course, if
John Brennan was the instigator of it on the basis of phony intelligence from one of these Baltic countries.
It would be ironic, of course, if the FISA court warrant approval gives the administration a rubric of legality. That would not change the fact that the leak regarding General Flynn and Russia, the leak regarding the FISA court's warrants themselves regarding Manafort and I, just those leaks are, as you know, a felony, punishable by no less than 10 years in prison. So, you know, at the end of the day, as Harry Truman said, the buck stops here. And the ultimate responsibility, whether Barack Obama ordered the break-in, or I should say the surveillance or not, is really immaterial. Assuming that his Justice Department ordered it, which I think is probable, he is parsing words in a lawyer-like way. To say that, oh, I didn't order it, I think is disingenuous at best. And then the late collusion of Hillary Clinton, who you know, a week before the election says that computer scientists have determined that there is a server in Trump Tower that is in touch with the Russians. Well, clearly she has been tipped off by the Central Intelligence Agency. This makes Watergate look like child's play in terms of the unconstitutional and, in fact, evil intents of the entire operation. Again, we surveilled the Republican candidate for president based on a Hillary Clinton campaign press release. And that's it. That is their proof, folks, and that is not proof at all.
And if you go back and you look at the BBC story, which was one of the stories that has served as the basis of all this discussion, it says that they got the information from a U.S. senior intelligence community member. And in that paragraph, it says that John Brennan started all of this with information from an intelligence agency in a Baltic country. So how did that BBC reporter get that piece of information? It had to come from either Brennan himself or somebody around Brennan.
It is extraordinary that the Trump administration has not moved in a speedier fashion to replace the many second and third level bureaucrats who are, still infecting these agencies. That's where the leaks are coming. So the administration has a double problem now: leaks out of the departments from Obama loyalists, and then some limited leaks from his own White House from the establishment Republicans there that he has hired. Now, Washington, as you know, has always been obsessed with leaks and leaking, but they have rarely found the perps because, of course, the news media continues to protect them. In any event, I thank you, George Neumayr, for joining us here on Infowars.com, and we'll be right back to talk about the largest burgeoning scandal in American political history.